Welcome to In Conversation with MANWAR podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Do Not Be a Bystander campaign. You can join us in raising awareness about bullying by joining donotbeabystander.com, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay informed about upcoming episodes. Our special guest for today's episode is Catherine Swampy.
Welcome to Bullying Awareness Podcast. I'm your host, MANWAR Khan. Happy Canada Day. Canada Day is a time when Canadians comes together to express their love for their country and celebrate its rich cultural diversity and history. We believe in fostering respect, empathy, and kindness, which does not make us weak though. On the contrary, we are not bystanders when it comes to standing up for what is right. Now, I would like to introduce our special guest for today's podcast, Catherine Swampy. We are truly grateful for your presence, Catherine, especially considering your busy schedule on Canada Day. I would like to talk a little bit about Catherine. Catherine is a former band counselor for the Samson Cree Nation, SCN, and has an extensive background in politics and advocacy. I remember I met her at the first time I met her at one of the rallies where she was giving speech, and I really liked her speech. I never thought that Catherine would be in one of my podcasts. Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate that you being here today. So Catherine has run for various political positions, including member of Legislative Assembly of Alberta and the Member of Parliament for Canada. Catherine remains actively engaged in provincial and federal politics, advocating for the right and interests for her community. In addition to her political involvement, Catherine serves on multiple committees and boards. It is worth noting that Catherine has been advocating for First Nation rights from a young age, starting as early as 11 years old. Her lifelong commitment to fighting for her community's right and her extensive involvement in political and advocacy roles highlights her dedication to making a positive impact on both the local and the national level. Welcome, Catherine. Catherine, did I miss anything? You want to say anything else?
Uh, no, you got it all. Thank you so much for having me. Nanaskamao mamutaw mao kisimanito hi entertainment and uspiskao. Nesigasun pisamaya pewasquao egwa okamao kahiu isigospao. I'd just like to do a little intro in Cree, thanking the creator and thanking your guests and introducing myself by my Cree name. And yes, I am Catherine Swampy. So thank you, Manwar.
Thank you, Catherine. Now that we have introduced our special guest, let's get started with our question. My first question for you, Catherine. What is the Wear Orange on Canada Day movement? Can you tell me something about that?
So the movement started a few years ago after they had found the 215 graves at the residential school in Kamloops. It was just prior to Canada Day, a few months prior to Canada Day, and then they continue to this day to find graves outside of residential schools. I don't know the exact number. I do know that it was a little over 6,000 the last time I had checked, and it's increasing as they go to more and more residential schools. So not all of the residential schools have been checked as of yet. That doesn't include the industrial schools as well, which is kind of a string off from the residential schools. And they continue to find them. So the Wear Orange is also known as the No Pride in Genocide. So although a lot of people are so proud of Canada and we love the rich, diverse history of Canada, it does have a very dark side as well. And the Wearing Orange is, it's a movement of understanding that genocide, that history that it came from. And it's an understanding that, as proud as we are of our country, we can't forget that this is what it took for our country to get to this place. All of those children that have died in residential school, we want to remember them, and we want to remember that it wasn't just a barren wasteland that people had come to. There was a vast amount of people that lived here that had been killed off in order for the rest of Canadians to enjoy the country. So Wearing Orange signifies that darker history of Canada.
What can other Canadians can do to help?
Well, they can educate themselves, or they can share the education with others. To this day, I meet people who've not heard of residential school. I meet people who have no idea what happened at residential schools. And when they find out, oh my God, residential schools, like when they hear about the history of what happened there, and then they hear about the bodies that they're finding to this day, it's such a significant impact on individuals, because a lot of people have no idea that this happened. They don't teach it in schools. They don't teach it to our youth. And it really does need to be taken in a specialized university level course in order for people to have that historical background. And this is something that shouldn't be taken as a specialized course at university. People should be learning it in regular grade school. They need to understand that this is a part of our history. Indigenous people have endured a significant amount of oppression. If I go back a couple hundred years, Indigenous people were taken from wherever it was that they wanted to live, and they were forced to live on reserves, which cut them off from the land where they would hunt and gather plants, and it forced them to rely on the government to survive for subsistence, because they didn't have any when they're forced to live in a confined area. And then when it wasn't killing the Indigenous people off, they started using medical warfare like tuberculosis or blankets covered in smallpox, and killing the Indigenous people off in that manner. And when that didn't work, they took our children and they stuck them in residential schools. And when that didn't work, they created a system of apprehension where they're taking our children and they're putting them in foster care, and they are overrepresented now to this day. And we face these systemic racism for healthcare and education and justice. And even to this day, the struggles that Indigenous people are facing is, things like overcrowded housing, houses in failing conditions, houses that need new water wells. Like a number of houses are on boil water advisories. We have one of the largest undereducated populations. We have the largest or the highest unemployment rates. Indigenous people are facing things like extreme poverty, with no food or basic needs just not being met, not even having beds for sleeping in some cases, having broken fridges or stoves and no washers and dryers. And then when COVID hit, a lot of houses didn't have internet. But even if they had internet, not a lot of people have computers. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on. The list is significant. The lack of resources is just ridiculous when it comes to the oppression that is continuing to be faced. So how can people help? And when they're facing that much oppression to this day, that much oppression, not even scraping the top of what is being faced by Indigenous people, there's just so much people can get educated. People can look at other ways that they can assist First Nations people, not just by being a savior, but actually understanding that a lot of Indigenous people already know what it is that they need, and they already know what it is that is lacking in their community. They just need that extra support and that understanding from non-Indigenous people if they're able to get an understanding of what it is that's being faced. We're not out there trying to create a divide. It's not Indigenous people versus Canada. We're not fighting the government with our wearing orange. The no pride in genocide is it's not to chop down Canada in any way. It's just to raise awareness about the history, the dark side of Canada, what we ended up having to overcome to get to this point.
Right.
So I have no light in here. Can you still see me?
I can.
I feel like I'm sitting in the dark.
I can. So I personally know that you have a huge follower. You have lots of supporters. So that's why I'm asking you this question. So why do you think this is so important? I want to know your version. Why it is important?
It's important because not a lot of people are aware of what happened. Not a lot of people know about residential schools. It's not in the curriculum as of yet. I feel like the government isn't taking it very serious. Maybe they're working on the statistics. Like I said, they haven't completed going to every single residential school. There's been 96 Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, and very, very few of them have been answered. And to this day, we have such a high number of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and a growing number of missing and murdered Indigenous men. So it's important because it feels like if we don't raise the awareness, these kind of oppressions are just going to continue to happen. And when is it going to stop?
Thank you. I have a last question for you, Catherine. So will this orange, wearing orange on Canada Day movement thing, is it a continuation or is this a one-time event?
I know that a few years ago, I myself actually thought it was going to be a one-time event. This was just right after the 215 bodies were found in Kamloops, and there was the Wear Orange movement. But it is continuing to grow because it was huge in the news when they found the bodies in Kamloops, and then they're still finding them to this day, and you don't see them in the news anymore. It is almost like it has just faded out. It was a trend, and people cared at that moment, but they seem to have forgotten. And it seems like it's growing and it's becoming an every Canada Day situation rather than just a one-time event.
Thank you, Catherine. We have come to the end of the podcast. I would like to thank Catherine for joining us today. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. On this special day, we have the opportunity to explore the significant milestones, struggles, and achievements that have contributed to the fabric of our country. By digging deep into our history, we can gain a deeper understanding of the diverse cultures, Indigenous heritage, and immigrant contributions that have shaped Canada into a nation it is today. Canada Day is not only a time for celebration, but also an opportunity to reflect on how we can build a more empathetic and inclusive society, free from bullying, free from injustice, because injustice anywhere is a threat to to justice everywhere. Thank you so much for joining in conversation with Manwar Khan. We will see you next week.